Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the CBI's Achieving Net Zero Conference. I think I know most of you in the room, but for those that I don't, I'm Matthew Fell. I'm the Chief Policy Director at the CBI, and I'm your host for the next couple of days to steer us through the programme. Now, over those 2 days, we've got a great lineup for you. Business leaders, politicians, change makers, 1,100 attendees, dozens of media, and plenty of CBI staff on hand to help you if required. Now, in just 6 short months since COP26, the context for decarbonisation has changed quite dramatically. We'll be hearing from all of our speakers just what that means for our shared goal of achieving net zero. Before that, a few little bits of housekeeping. I'm not sure if it's good form to do pre-departure checks before a net zero conference, but here goes. First, we've got no scheduled fire drills or alarms, so if you do hear the alarm, please follow the Science Museum staff to the nearest assembly points. Could you also make sure you've got your phones on silent, but please absolutely do engage with us on social media. And then thirdly, we'd like to make the conference as interactive as possible, so we'll have opportunity to put questions to all of our speakers over the course of the 2 days. At that moment, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. We'll get a number and a microphone to you, and if you say your name and organisation at that point, the moderator for the session will bring you in. On that note, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the day, Cbi Director General and my boss, Tony Danker. Tony.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. How brilliant to be here at the Science Museum. It is, in a perfect metaphor for the event, warmer than we expected, mainly because the sun, which we clearly didn't expect, has come through. So I'm declaring an official amnesty on jackets. So for anybody wearing jackets, you can take off your jackets. It's not rude. But we have got the aircon on. We're going to try and bring it down 1.5 degrees and make it a bit more comfortable. But thank you all for coming this morning. And I want to thank in particular our strategic partners in the room and downstairs, Bain & Company, Equinor, and National Grid. Thank you to the three of you. And also our corporate partners, CGI, Estee Lauder Companies, Hitachi Energy, and Mott MacDonald. And your support has made this conference possible. Each of those companies, and I know their stories, have a story to tell about striving for net zero. But you know, every company that I speak to in CBI membership has a story to tell about striving for net zero. Now, 3 years ago, I would have said that the pressure from outside our companies to reach net zero was a burning platform. But now it's clear to me and to anybody who was at COP in Glasgow last year that the pressure comes from within. Making our companies net zero is no less a commercial imperative than making our companies more digital. Put simply, if your strategy isn't fit for a net zero world, your strategy will fail. So when we organised this conference, and it was long before events in February, I thought we'd be talking confidently about a united movement, business, government, civil society, the progress on the road to COP27, a very straightforward story. But now I'd like to talk about something else, because something has got in the way of that straight line from COP26 to COP27. I'd like to talk about the cost of living. I'd like to talk about global energy markets and about the prospective slowdown in our economy. The war in Ukraine has changed the game, let's be honest, morally, economically, and geopolitically. And not the way some might think. It doesn't, in my view, hail the return of fossil fuels as anything other than a vital bridge, which of course they are. Why? Because it makes impossible the plans of the EU and others to rely on fossil fuels for Russia whilst they transition. Because it makes the price of fossil fuels from coal and gas, which have tripled since 2019, unaffordable at the scale we're using them. The war has therefore, despite what some might say, made the switch to clean energy more urgent to guarantee, yes, global security, yes, national security, but perhaps most importantly, the security of every family in the country. Inflation changes the game too. It's at 9% and unlikely to fall fast soon. People are struggling. Some are at breaking point. Food's gone up, energy's certainly gone up, and will go up again in the autumn. And I think that people feel powerless. Their lives at the mercy of global storms that not only they can control, but they know their government can't even control. And so while the government support package has eased some of the pressure, even they admit it's a temporary solution. But we're not returning to normal anytime soon. Energy prices are likely to go higher for longer than we imagined. Yet reimagining the supply side, which is what all of us have been working on, will take years, not months. So this is, yes, a crisis, a long-term crisis that needs a long-term solution. But let's be honest, we do need a fix now. And it's driving something of a backlash against net zero. You all will have felt it in your jobs. You all would have read it in the papers. Partly understandable in the circumstances, but also coming most forcefully from long-time skeptics, arguing that net zero is a costly distraction. Better we stick with fossil fuels. Now, currently, according to the polling, the public don't quite agree. Despite all the challenges, the surveys show that continued commitment to tackle climate change is there. But let's not be complacent. Some of you in this room have spoken to me about your own focus groups that you're doing with customers. And what customers are saying is, I back this decarbonisation, but can we please put it on hold for now? Well, we can. Business and government must therefore take this seriously. We must show that decarbonisation is the solution, not the problem, or we'll lose that support. We must show how it delivers lower bills, better jobs, and economic growth. So I would like to make that case this morning on two fronts. Number one, that going green will cut people's energy bills. Going green will cut people's energy bills by giving people more power to use less energy and limit the impact of rising fossil fuels on their lives. So the government's energy security strategy, which I know you've all read from start to finish, we're going to quiz you on it later, it commits to fresh targets on the supply side, backing for nuclear power and hydrogen and the need to speed up renewables. But what it fails to do in this crisis is say anything about the demand side. Now, I know that demand measures, like asking people to turn down their thermostat, goes against all the libertarian instincts of this Prime Minister and the Cabinet. But I think they're wrong. Energy waste is like food waste. It has no justification. It is not good for anyone. And there are lots of ways to help people bring down their bills. So my first message this morning, and I did some radio on it as well, is that we need to start being serious about energy efficiency. Because to date, let's be honest, we haven't been. The UK has some of Europe's oldest, leakiest buildings. Data collected from smart thermostats across Europe showed that UK homes lose heat up to 3 times faster than energy-efficient homes in countries such as Germany. It's estimated that government cuts to climate policies over the last decade, including energy efficiency measures, have added around £2.5 billion to the nation's energy bills, costing households £40 a year. We also know that average energy performance rating for homes in England and Wales is D, and improving the energy efficiency of those homes and those rated below to a C could save households around £500 a year, based on the April price cap increase. And businesses can save too. It's estimated UK SMEs could reduce their energy bills by up to a quarter through simple things like LED lighting, smart tech, and other measures. So what are we waiting for? To be on track to achieve our targets, the UK needs to invest, we estimate, around £5.2 billion every year to 2035 in making homes more energy efficient. That's, if the Chancellor's listening, that's 1.7 billion of public investment per year, but 3.5 billion, more than double, from landlords and homeowners from the private sector. Now, that does sound expensive if you're the Treasury right now. But the problem is that higher energy bills and rising inflation just cost the Chancellor £22 billion worth of support in the spring, £15 billion in May, and we haven't reached October yet. Do we want a new normal of energy efficiency or a new normal of £1 billion bailouts every quarter? So now we need to throw our whole weight behind this. We must fulfill the commitments the government made to close the investment gap in energy efficiency. Commitments in their manifesto, no less. Let's learn the lessons from previous policies like Green Home Grants, which failed, and get a plan in place. Now, we can get started really fast. We're excited about the Eco Scheme, which many of you will know and has outlasted others. It supports fuel-poor households to save through energy efficiency measures. As such, it's the fastest tool we have right now to get households upgraded before the winter. It works very simply, if you don't know it. Obligated energy suppliers help promote and fund the installation of energy efficiency measures for these households, such as loft or wall insulation or heating solutions, working together with installers. But households and suppliers are still waiting confirmation of its next phase, nearly 2 months since its end in March, when the energy prices really began to hit. But it can be addressed today. The government has the opportunity right now to prioritise the legislation of the fourth Eco Scheme before the summer recess. And we can also, in our view, and those in industry, go further. We're asking the UK government to commit an additional £1 billion of support annually to create Eco Plus, to help more households get started on the journey. Under Eco Plus, as we call it, government funding could be matched by your and my contributions as customers and made affordable through government working with banks and employers to develop green finance options. So this stuff is available to us right now. Innovations abound in heating and energy efficiency, and we're just not where we should be in the UK. From district heating networks, where we badly trail the Europeans, to solar panel installation, would be good on a day like today, and a broad range of smart technologies. For example, the rollout of smart meters, which show in real time the amount and cost of energy your home's using. It's resulted in 86% of users saying they've changed how they heat their homes. The tech behind innovative heating controls like smart thermostats is evolving, not only to allow us to manage our heating remotely via an app, but also to adapt our temperature levels automatically to the way we live. Look, it's time to get serious about energy demand. There is nothing libertarian about asking people to wait decades for the government to fix supply. Let's do something now to give people the power they need, literally, to manage the cost of living. So that's argument one, energy efficiency. Argument two, going green will bring the UK its first post-Brexit boom and allow us to genuinely outcompete the world. I am absolutely convinced of this. The UK prize on offer is worth tens of billions of pounds and rising to our economy. Research we did in January estimated that 3.5 trillion of extra investment a year is needed to get to the world to net zero, taking overall global investment in those areas to 9.2 trillion. That's 3.4 trillion on average for new low-emission vehicles, 1.7 trillion to make our homes green, and nearly 2 trillion of investment into power generation, distribution, and storage systems. That's some big markets, people. And if we move quickly, we in the UK have the chance to win share. And if we do, that brings all the good stuff. The green jobs across the country, help for local economies and levelling up, all the while strengthening our global competitiveness. I have said before that green IP that we develop in this country allows us to export products and services at a level comparable to what financial services has proved for the UK economy in the past. You know, we are living through the greatest reallocation of global capital in our history, with, as Mark Carney told us last November, $130 trillion, 40% of global financial assets and rising, already committed to net zero. Let me be very blunt and commercial. That is $130 trillion looking to go to the best green growth projects in the world. The UK needs to be hungry and ready to compete for the lion's share of that investment. As I've said before when addressing a right-wing conservative audience, it's not woke, it's wealth. And if you want to know how the war in Ukraine impacts this, again, follow the money. Bloomberg reported that in just 1 week alone in March this year, investors shifted almost £1 billion into clean energy funds. The evidence mounts, and that's why those of you are in this room, that companies that move early on sustainable opportunities like this are achieving success. More profitable because they're cutting costs from decarbonising, faster sales growth because customers, B2B and B2C, are looking for these products and services. And as a result, they are securing cheaper capital and performing better. So at a time when growth is stalling in the UK across the world, and the UK government is looking for growth solutions that don't overheat the economy or exacerbate inflation, more than ever, green growth is the growth bet we need. We at the CBI have reviewed all the opportunities for our economy in the next 10 years across every sector and every area of the business value chain. And I can tell you, the money is green. And today, we in the UK have a competitive advantage. But that position, I know from talking to many of you in particular who work in overseas markets, that position is under rapid attack from our international competitors, so we dare not squander it. Those on the right of politics, in my view, make a short-sighted argument about the costs of transition. They fail to see these enormous prizes. They fail to see how the UK in a post-Brexit world can become a trading powerhouse in the largest growing market on earth. But the Prime Minister, to his credit, has stayed a believer. And I urge him not to tone down his ambitions, but to double down on his government's actions. Here's how. 3 suggestions. First, unblock delays. Publish, and it sounds incredibly technical and dull, but I know from talking to people in this room, it will make the difference. Publish an accelerated planning and consenting regime for offshore wind projects to cut delivery time in half. And reform the onshore wind, let's hope we get into that, planning regime that currently prevents projects being approved if just a single person objects. Second, now let's back economically the critical technologies we've agreed in the strategy already. Use the upcoming energy bill to provide business model support mechanisms for hydrogen and carbon capture storage so that the first contracts for difference can be awarded in Q1 of 2023. And deploy 2 more carbon capture clusters by 2030. And I know from our engagement in one of them, these are among the most exciting levelling up projects in our country's history. Third, do more to unlock private capital. With 130 trillion of capital on the table, government can use its balance sheet creatively. One possible solution is offering guarantees to attract and leverage the billions in private investment we need. These 3 moves amount to a package that the Prime Minister and the Energy Secretary can be proud of, and what's more, the Chancellor can be too. No new policy, no big funding ask, just deliver what's already been announced. So what we set out today on energy demand and supply side will allow government to stop acting like a pressure cooker, forever responding to events when they boil over. But let's be honest, there is work for all of us to do, all of us businesses in this room. And I say this, first of all, help your customers and employees cope with current hardship. You can provide advice and assistance and payment plans to ease their burden, something we are looking at ourselves at the CBI. As for energy suppliers, some of you in the room, take measures such as the vulnerability commitment, using data from smart and prepayment meters to target and strengthen support for vulnerable customers, and continue to help customers fit energy efficiency upgrades and tools like smart thermostats. And to every firm, regardless of whether or not you're in the energy business, stay on track with your own net zero journeys. If you're well on your way to decarbonising operations, products, services, build on your achievements, increase your ambitions, and look to see how you can help your customers, and especially your supply chain, get on that journey too. And if you're committed, but struggling to make progress, which by the way, is most of you, whether you admit it or not, we are here to help you out. Today, we're launching a new network of sustainability professionals, the CBI Sustainability Community. It's open to every CBI member, targeting those in charge at your company of the net zero journey. We are going to build a community that genuinely shares insight, that genuinely compares practice, solves common problems together, and we'll give you all the experts we can, give you mentoring and allow you to mentor others around you. So please come and join us. Just to finish, crises are temporary, but net zero is now permanent. The war in Ukraine has devastated a people, but it has also smashed a paradigm that depended on concentrated pockets of energy, concentrated in the hands of people we can no longer depend upon. It's time to give UK families control, give UK government a more stable footing to policy, and UK businesses the chance to innovate and deliver prosperity for all. And that means securing the affordability, security, and resilience of our energy. It means easing the squeeze on people's pockets and creating the future jobs and sustainable growth our country needs. So I'm afraid, compared to our original plan, this isn't just a milestone on a journey from COP26 to COP27. This is a bit of a game changer. So we need to be more purposeful than ever before. And that's what we're going to use this conference to do, to get started. Thanks very much for coming. Okay. I'm going to magically introduce our first panel, and you're not going to notice these guys come on stage and dismantle the podium whilst the panel come up. So before you come up, we have got Adam Vaughan, our panel chair, chief reporter at The New Scientist, a man with whom I used to work many years ago. Bernice Lee, chair of the Sustainability Accelerator Advisory Board at Chatham House. Claire O'Neill, who will be known to many of you, co-chair of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And finally, John Pettigrew, who we all know and is one of our sponsors today, Chief Executive Officer at National Grid. As they dismantle the podium, please give our panel a round of applause. Thank you.
Just go for it, yeah. Just
all right.
As we go. How's life?
Very good, and you?
Where are you going to sit?
shall I go here? Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Is
do
the-
it. Good, I can poke.
Right. Is my mic working?
Right.
Good morning.
Squint.
Okay, well, as you know, and as Tony has just been talking about, we've had a squeeze on gas supplies last year and the war in Ukraine, and they've sent wholesale energy prices soaring, driving up inflation in the process. This week's estimates, you may have seen them, the domestic energy bills in October are now expected to be about £2,900. So some quarters have suggested that the answer to this is to cut levies, green levies on energy bills, including the eco scheme that Tony mentioned, to drill for shale gas, and some have even suggested we hold a referendum on net zero. Even moderate voices are suggesting that we need new oil and gas production, saying we need to be realistic. On the other side, we've had people calling for an acceleration of our net zero efforts. We've had the International Energy Agency saying that renewables are the answer to insulating us from future price shocks. We've also got people saying the UK government should lift caps on renewable energy auctions, and Tony has talked about the planning aspect there as well, and the energy efficiency side of it. The government's big response was, with the energy security strategy, was large on nuclear. It basically had nothing new to say on onshore wind or energy efficiency at all, and I think it's fair to say that it drew a bit of a mixed response. I think it's also fair to say that the COP26 climate summit sadly feels like a different world, even though it was only half a year ago. Unfortunately, we have a stellar panel here to discuss where we go next on net zero with this ongoing energy crisis. I suppose the first question I wanted to ask you all, and put your hand up to jump in, is really, was the UK prepared? Was the UK adequately prepared for the crisis we've seen with energy? What had it done? What had it done well? What had it done badly in advance? Who wants to go first on that?
Well, I can start. So I think the answer is, compared to other European countries, we were in a better position. The reality is, you would all seen in the media that we have a number of sources of gas into the UK. We have North Sea, we have the Norwegian gas, we have the interconnectors, we have LNG. And actually, we have about 4 to 6% of our gas coming from Russia. So we weren't as exposed from a supply perspective as other European countries like Germany, which I think is at about 40%, as is Italy. But nonetheless, we've been an importer of gas for the last 2 decades, and therefore we are exposed to gas prices in Europe and worldwide. And we've seen that in terms of the impact it's had on people's bills. So from the perspective of supply, we were in a better position. I think when you stand back and look at what's happened in the UK energy market over the last decade, then the amount of investment that's gone into renewables has clearly helped, because again, you've all seen in the media days where we have zero carbon electricity production from offshore wind, onshore wind, solar and nuclear. We're not quite where we need to be yet, and we'll come on to that, but nonetheless we're less reliant on fossil fuels than many other countries and have made good progress. So it's an incredibly difficult and horrible situation, and one that's we need to all be very thoughtful about in terms of how we help mitigate the impact on bills. But from a sort of global perspective, we're probably in a better position to many countries in Europe.
That's interesting. Some of that's by accident, some of it's by design.
Yeah.
Do any other thoughts on that?
I'd agree with that. I think
Yes.
if you look at the trilemma, the classic energy trilemma of cost, security and carbon, because of a whole bunch of decisions that were taken, particularly around the phase out of coal and actually the use of gas and renewables, we had managed to drop our carbon footprint from our energy system quite dramatically. I think from a cost point of view, we had made some strategically bad decisions like closing gas storage, although I don't think that would have had a huge impact on the actual spot price. And I think the whole world forgot that energy also had political implications. We kind of had the OPEC shock when we thought, and of course the countries we were beholden to in the oil price rise were not trying to invade largely their neighbours and have sort of potentially nuclear wars. And so I think that strong sense of politics really mattering in energy, I think we all took the ball off. But I find when you talk to other countries, when you look at the situations there, we're actually in a reasonably good situation to get back because we haven't baked in huge dependency, as Alan says, as John says, with Russian gas in particular.
Got you. And Bernice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question because in some ways spilled milk is never nice. But we do know that Carbon Brief, for example, was talking about had some of the policies not scrapped, say in 2012, we would have saved something like 2.9 billion of consumers' energy bills today. But however, I'd prefer to look forward. And what I think is really exciting, what we heard is that indeed it is about doubling down on the things that we know are good, whether it's efficiency, renewables, etc., all of which are going to get us even better prepared for the future. So I think that, luckily, as the keynote speaker mentioned, that also the public is also on our side. Poll after poll, I was digging last night preparing for this, looking at poll after poll by Onwards, by More in Common, all of them, I know that we should not take it for granted, that actually, luckily as well for all of us, actually the electorates are very supportive of net zero and staying the course. And we shouldn't take it for granted, but you know what? The numbers are on our side. I think the government would lose 1.3 million votes, I think, from one of the pollers says, if actually it's scrapped net zero. So whatever anyone says, actually, the numbers seem to be on our side. So the good news is we could be better prepared.
So on that point, on the numbers are on our side, I mean, Tony said earlier on about, there's a bit of a backlash. It sometimes feels like that backlash is noisier. What do you think those who are the numbers on our side can do better?
Oh, I think that we will always have people who disagree, and it's good in a democratic society should welcome debates, and we should debate. And at the moment, the lucky thing is that we are seeing that efficiency, renewables, all of them are winning by numbers. They're not winning by politics only. So you look everywhere in the world. I mean, Germany, I think, had a KfW scheme on efficiency, 600,000 or something over the last decade uptake, created 900,000 jobs. My God, that's great. So, you compete on numbers. The key for me is to make sure that, and since we're at CBI here, which I think is great, what is great as well is to remind ourselves that we are entering a different stage of decarbonization, at a stage when we have to learn as we do. And therefore, it is really important. I think the speaker also talked about the question about IP and learning. So in some ways, this is opportunity for all of us to use the future positive narrative to help us get over this barrier that we will continue to get. And Alan, just to clarify, as a former politician, so we can't have a referendum on net zero because it's not a constitutional change. So sorry, Nige, you had your moment. And fracking is not coming back. I bear the scars of fracking discussions, and I don't. For all we can make the arguments about this gas supply, it is just not going to be a source of energy in the UK.
I meant to say, by the way, at the start, I am going to turn it over to you guys in a minute for questions, so please do have your questions ready. Just looking forward, we looked back there a bit, and you've talked about a couple of the things that I think Claire and Tony, John, you mentioned about how investment in renewables and the phasing out of coal has helped us. But looking forwards, What is the answer to the energy crisis we're facing? Is it the UK promoting a more sort of collaborative, interconnected global energy system, or is now the time to kind of take a more island mentality, a kind of protectionist approach to our energy needs? You know, it's all about security and we can produce it all ourselves. What's the direction?
Well, I mean, I was going to say, look, I mean, obviously some things have changed, so we are not really going to be in a world of unfettered globalization, but we also know that we can't produce it all ourselves. And that actually means that we have to be very strategic about the kind of partnership we're going to make, and also making sure that we're finding a way to talk to, for example, outside the context of the common market as well, with those our neighbors who can collaborate around strategic technologies. So we are going to be in this half full, half empty space, but at the same time we can't do it all ourselves. We haven't started the conversation about what it really means to produce it all ourselves. So we need to start thinking about how to become strategic partners for people we would like to produce technologies for the future with.
But I mean, all businesses are looking at resilient supply chains as opposed to low-cost supply chains, and I think energy is no different. But so I think, you know, we should be looking for more sovereign energy, and of course renewables is the ultimate sovereign energy source. But to Bernice's points, there are massive opportunities to collaborate on a tech perspective. And I think what's different about the low carbon ecosystem, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, it requires a much more complicated ecosystem in order to create a firm power provision using renewables with creating adequate storage, bringing on hydrogen and CCS. These are not simply whack up a few plants and you'll connect it all up and we'll be fine. And if and I think we need to build some capacity to do that. The government is clearly a bit distracted, albeit there are very good, excellent civil servants still working away on the details of this. But that's where we need to go, these really complicated questions where we do need to collaborate in a different way in order to make sure we can use our homegrown energy, but that we can also keep the lights on.
Yeah, John? I mean, I think there are two things I'd say. So first of all, resilience. So I used to be the operator of the grid actually many years ago, so keeping the lights on it requires mixture of technologies. So you don't want to be reliant on gas from a single source, you don't want to be reliant on coal or offshore wind for that matter. You need a mixture of technologies to have a resilient network. Given the circumstances that we see, we also want to have a strong energy production domestically, and actually renewables is the answer to that. So as I look forward, we need to collaborate on things like technology, because actually we can deliver a zero carbon network, zero carbon electricity to the UK, zero carbon energy. But actually it is complicated. You need to have long-term storage. You need to be investing in technologies such as hydrogen. You need to find ways of actually operating a network, keeping the lights on when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, and that requires new technologies. And in the same way as we've seen fantastic cost reductions in offshore wind over the last decade, with good support from the government, we now need similar support to think about the new technologies that deliver that resilience. And then interconnectedness is an interesting question. So we are interconnected to the gas system. We will require gas for many years to come as part of this transition. On the electricity side, actually being interconnected with friendly countries actually has massive benefit for consumers. So we will see more interconnection between the UK and mainland Europe. That helps in reducing costs. It creates access to market for generation in the UK that can export their power to Europe. But also it mitigates some of the risks around things like wind. So actually the more connected you are to European systems, the more less reliant you are onto one weather front. And therefore you can actually build resilience by interconnecting the networks across Europe with friendly countries. So it's a complicated question, but yeah, I think those are some of the points.
It's a bit of both.
Yeah, just one thing to add on the global, in favour of global and open, which John will know and folks at Equinor in the room will know. What we're doing in clean energy is globally significant in this country. Right? We have global companies who are basically conducting renewable energy R&D in this country because of our geological island status. You know, I spent quite a lot of time in the Humber and the East Coast cluster. You've got some of the highest emitting parts of Europe right next to a place where we put carbon back in the ground. And there's a reason why Equinor and other global energy companies are in Britain. And they're in Britain not because they are British companies, they're in Britain because Britain is one of the most interesting places on earth to do this work. And so, you know, I would be careful about being politically closed. I think economically we want to stay really quite open about this.
And just to go back to this collaboration, so the offshore wind sector deal that we brought in 2019 was a world-leading example of how you actually get the regulators, the treasury, the auction structure, the supply chain, and the financiers in one place and create a long-term plan, which reduced the cost of capital by half within 3 months in that sector. And of course, we can now start to really reap the benefits. Sadly, there's not a lot of that thinking going on at the moment, because we should be doing, well, I think carbon capture, we are again seen as a world-leading test case for actually creating these clusters. So it can be done. And for me, the most important thing, forget the political turmoil, is energy. Just if I may throw in, energy ministers come and go like sort of leaves in autumn. I think I served for 2 years, and I was the longest serving minister in the last 40. And you kind of need to have a long-term perspective on this stuff, and that's something I think we've forgotten. You'll know this, that we like to show up in your control room for photos, and then we all bugger off again.
We actually have a playbook actually for new energy ministers because we play it every year.
And so that sense of crikey, this is the fundamental thing that we have to do, and we need to make it a serious proposition.
Oh, I want to come back to that point about long term in a bit, but
just quickly, I just want to really agree with the point I think is extremely important that Richard just made about open markets. We have never done decarbonisation in a world without globalisation markets. And it has really helped us reduce cost in different ways. We know how to do it slightly differently with different people, perhaps, but nonetheless, we still really, really need open markets for a lot of decarbonisation that we need to do.
Great. Right. One last question from me, then it's over to you. So have your questions ready, please. So a couple of you have talked about, how the UK has done compared to other countries, but the UK is not perfect. And as you look sort of globally in terms of how other countries have reacted to the energy crisis, where do you see what would be the lessons or examples you would give of where they've reacted well and that we could maybe learn from?
Well, if I can jump in, and I think it relates to Tony's point about permitting and the general sludge factor that comes with any big energy pivot, because first of all, if you're doing renewable supply chains are incredibly tight, we're really short of skills, the materials, cost curve is going through the roof, and we have all kinds of homegrown disadvantages like, permit problems. And I've been very struck in Germany, actually, not to say they don't have some of the other problems, but and it's LPG, but they're building those terminals in 18 months. That normally would be a 7-year process. So I think this sense of conviction that's going around Repower EU and Germany to basically say, we just got to do this. This is mission critical, and we're just going to blast through the papers. I mean, isn't it the case that a wind farm takes 7 years to permit and a year to build? That's bonkers. We've got an energy crisis. And the other thing I think that's really interesting is I think there is a really interesting carbon capture and carbon removal, and that's particularly happening in the Far East. And you could look at all the charts, and we basically, according to the charts, have to halve our emissions by 2030 to stay on track for 1.5 degrees. 2030 is 90 months away. That feels like quite a tall order, and we are going to have to take a shed load of carbon out of the atmosphere, whether it's through nature or through chemical removal. And I see other countries embracing that, not having the ideological arguments that have killed us on this, and just getting on with it.
Okay, so Germany, where else?
A related point actually, and when you look at the ambition that's been set in the BES document, so 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. We built 10 in the last decade, so 40 gigawatts in the next 8. So that's a huge challenge. Add to that the amount of infrastructure to then take the power from the coast to where people use it. So in the last 32 years, the UK has built 150 kilometres of new overhead line. We need to build 600 to support that 50 gigawatts, so it's 4 times the amount in a quarter of the time. Mm-hmm. The real challenge links to planning, and Tony was spot on in his speech earlier on this morning, that we need to find a way of engaging with local communities so that we all see this as part of a national interest to deliver net zero. Nobody wants infrastructure in their local communities, but other countries, Holland for example, provide community benefit for people that are hosting infrastructure on behalf of their country. It's referenced in the BES document as something the government's thinking about, and I think we need to look at other countries about how they provide local benefits to communities who are effectively helping us deliver net zero.
There was a lot of briefing ahead of the energy security strategy that there'd be something like that on onshore wind, right? But I mean, would you? I mean, that obviously didn't come to pass. Do you think that would be a good idea? Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, I think we just need to have the conversation at a national level. So, ideally, people don't want infrastructure hosted in their local communities. If they do have it, they want it to have minimum impact, and there should be some enduring benefits. And other countries are building infrastructure quicker by providing those local community benefits.
I want to say something about money. The Biden administration and the European Union, through its COVID recovery fund, are spending billions and billions and billions of public subsidy on all of this stuff. We are not, and that's a choice. I understand why the Chancellor makes that choice. We are spending half the Europeans, a third of the Americans. But what it does is it makes it incumbent upon us to be the best in the world by far at fostering green markets. It's why Claire is so right when she talks about the offshore wind model and spreading it across all energy technologies. Because if we're not going to compete for public subsidy, and if there's any car companies in the room, you'll know what I mean, how it is to get electric vehicle funding from the UK government compared to other governments in the world. If we're not going to compete for public subsidy, we have to be the best designers of the best and biggest green markets in the world. Otherwise, we'll just lose share and relevance.
Okay, right. Thank you, everyone. There's a hand over there I'm seeing first. In the second row, we've got a microphone over there, and then we'll come over there in a second. I don't know how many microphones we've got. There's someone in about the fourth or fifth row over there. It's over here. And there's one at the back as well, which I'll come to you afterwards. So there's number one. I think there's one over the second row there.
You could just shout.
Or you can just...
No, wait for the mic. Wait for the mic.
Here comes the mic. Here comes the mic, then we'll all hear you. And remember to say who you are and where you're from, please.
Yes, Martin Hawley, my company's Winsland. I've got a layman's question, really. You've talked about the cost of electricity going down, but the price to consumers is going up. And you haven't talked about the market and how the market works. And I just want to know, is the market serving consumers? We know it's serving some businesses very nicely. And if we carry on with this market and we're always lagging the energy demand, are we always just going to be behind that and consumers are paying a huge amount for it? Thank you.
Who wants to take that?
Well, I'm happy to take that. So I think it's a great question, actually, and one of the things I was pleased to see in the strategy document the government announced a few weeks ago was a recognition that they need to have a look at market reform. So the reality is today that the price of electricity is still set by gas generation. So they have a marginal pricing system. So even though we're seeing more and more renewable energy being used on a day-to-day basis, the market was established many years ago and actually is set by the marginal plant that still happens to be gas. So what we're seeing in the UK at the moment is high gas prices, generators are using gas, and that's setting the electricity price, which flows through to customers. So the fact that the BES document identified that as and recognised that actually, as we go through this energy transition, we also need to look at the market mechanisms in terms of how we price electricity. I think is a positive, and we'll be contributing to that as part of National Grid as well in terms of our thoughts on it.
And I think it's a great question as well, because we neither have a free market nor a controlled market. We have this sort of rather unhappy halfway house at the moment where we went gangbusters for competition, switch, and then I brought in the price cap bill because that wasn't being delivered in terms of lower prices. And something will have to change. Having been rail minister, some talk about now renationalising the energy market. I don't think that's a good idea at all. But I think I agree completely with John's point that we have to start thinking about not pricing to gas and also potentially pricing locally to reflect local supply and demand. If what we want is consumers or to be using microgrids or businesses to be doing a self-balancing thing, there is no pricing signal yet that supports that. My issue, which is what I think is the right way, is again, I think we're just really overwhelmed at the moment in terms of dealing with energy issues. And if again we're serious, we need to have a real think about Ofgem's role and position and staffing. And we have to really explore some of these opportunities. I love what you said about giving communities, a benefit for hosting national infrastructure. Doesn't that turn the whole planning debate? Rather than I don't want these wind turbines marching over my hills, wow, I'm actually supporting something very dramatic. And again, this is why energy in this sort of, issue is so incredibly important, both on supply and demand.
Thanks both. We've got a question over here, number 2.
Hello, good morning. Dr. Roshan Bujihawan, University of Birmingham. Thank you to the panelists for your insightful comments this morning. My questions are twofold, and it looks at the broader agenda of achieving net zero. The first question is about looking at how do we scale up this motivation of achieving net zero. We are conscious that there's a lot of policy talk, but we are still lacking in terms of our engagement and action when it comes to looking at the business concerns more widely, particularly looking at SMEs and their concerns of how they're moving in that direction. Because the overall concern is how fast we are moving towards achieving the set targets. The second is looking at human level engagement within organization in terms of the take-up of how we are changing behavior and how we are engaging towards contributing towards achieving net zero. I just wondered what the panel thoughts are on these questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure all of you can answer, but certainly there was some of that in your address earlier on.
I said at COP that one of the things I didn't like about COP was this huge amount of focus on governments to fix this, to popularize net zero, which is what you're describing. I think you need great B2C companies that know how to build great products and services. You know, some of the examples in the economy, whether or not it's on packaging or food or heating solutions, I think those are the things that turn this from a global emergency, problem for governments, problem for COP, to something I, as a member of the public, can do something with. And I think it is businesses that will popularize climate change through doing the things we do best, which is innovative products and services that make customers' lives better. I think that's the stuff that's going to make the most difference.
I agree completely. And the slightly depressing thing is if you read the Glasgow Declaration, all 8 pages, do you know how many times it mentions the word business? 0 times. And there is a view that this global ecosystem will somehow set these targets and somehow they'll get turned into national regulation. And I think most politicians go to COP and do their thing and then leave thinking, thank God that's over. This year we had an extraordinary business representation. I mean, everybody was there, weren't they? And really wanting to be engaged and making that part of the process for all the reasons Tony said is so important. But to your points are about how do we deliver at a human level, I want to go back to the cost point. I mean, net zero and doing better with, say, energy efficiency is no longer just a nice to have. It's a way to save serious money, both in your home and in your business. And so oddly, using this crisis as a way to drive better, lower carbon solutions is a real opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, building on that as well, I think that it is obviously the moments of truth for everybody, but actually, I really like that earlier, the moments of truth, but also that ultimately, I mean, if we want to remind us of the lesson from the last couple of days, is that hopefully integrity in public life does matter, and it applies as much to businesses as it does to individuals, increasingly, probably. And that actually means that the net zero plan, the target driving, the ambition will be much more watched by different people. And on a human level, we can all relate to wanting to be good and doing the right thing and saving money, as Claire said, at the same time. So I think that as we are here at CBI, which is very important to remind ourselves that, it isn't just about the fast movers. It is also about whether or not you are holding your peers accountable so that they're not engaging in negative lobbying, so that we are actually all moving together. So I think that those activities we will begin to see more and more, that businesses co-engaging in positive lobbying and holding those engaging in negative lobbying accountable. And that will help, I hope, drive implementation all around in different ways, using integrity as a starting point to drive some more climate action.
Great. Let's take 3 and 4 together. Who knows, we might have time for another question after that. Let's see if you want to do your questions one after the other.
Hi, my name's Ida Tucker. I run a social enterprise called Hope Sustainability, and we work with schools to start to embed a deeper understanding about all the sustainability challenges and opportunities into schools. And one of the big issues, to take what Tony was saying about businesses are going to deliver the transition, and companies are spending billions of pounds every year on implementing their decarbonisation targets, but they're spending nothing on communicating to the general public what the challenges are, why it's the transition, why it's going to take time. So the question is, why aren't CEOs making a priority of getting their companies to actually communicate to the general public, but particularly to school kids, about the issues around sustainability and how they need to link that into the lessons that kids are learning in the national curriculum to see why sustainability is something that should be embedded as part of the DNA of every family all the time, but through the education system. Because I think that's the way that we get public perception and public support for these issues, by turning from superficial perceptions of solutions to deeper understanding of the challenges and how they are being developed by the business community, and how the public can embrace that through knowledge.
Great. So why aren't businesses talking to the young more? And the other question was, there was someone else over there? Number 4? We'll take these both at once.
I'm number 5. Good morning, Mike Maudsley. I'm the CEO of Infinium. I run quite a large energy from waste company, and I'd like to know why energy from waste isn't on any energy agenda. First of all, it uses non-recyclable waste, so it's waste which is going in landfill, and we are still putting a lot in landfill. We are still exporting it to other countries. Norway use it in the winter, our waste in the winter for their fuel. I really want to get it on the agenda, but I want to know why it's not and how I can get energy from waste on the agenda, particularly as we can go negative carbon. If we capture it, we can put heat systems in, which was mentioned. We can create spinning reserve for the national grid. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we've got the young question and the energy, I was going to say incinerators, energy from waste
That's
question.
the problem. Right.
Question. Who would like to take one of those, or two of those?
Well, can I perhaps try and jump in on both? So it's a really great point about education. I think the government has put a climate science sort of GCSE together, which is good, because we need to understand that. I think companies do this. I sit on the board of an energy company who make a huge effort to go into local schools, not just to talk about the challenge, but to talk about the opportunity. This is back to Tony's point about showing that this is actually where the jobs are going to be in the future, and in particular for young women who find the concept of a job in energy to be very, I'm sure you find this too, you think it's all sort of hard hats and welding. And in fact, data management and consumer behavior and innovation are, apply to equally to young men and young women. So, and you're right that much more could be done, and I think this is a huge role for you, Tony, if I may, kind of encouraging people to get out there and show the opportunity. Mike, it's a great point, and I don't know this question of incineration and dangerous particles. Again, other countries seem to do this so much better than us, and there's definitely got to be a place for dealing with a waste issue, which we and I guess people would much prefer it to be fully recycled, but that's not going to happen, and actually using it to power in the grid. So keep plugging on, and let's make sure we do raise that issue when we can with government, because it's another great way of reducing CO2.
Yeah, I'd love to have a chat with you actually, because again, I think we do quite a lot with schools to try and make sure that people understand the role that they can play. Last year, National Grid did a survey on the back of actually thinking around behaviours, which was one of the previous questions, which is the reality is that the reduction in CO2 emissions that we've seen over the last decade hasn't required us as individuals to actually change our behaviours very much. But actually, if we're going to deliver net zero, then all of us are going to have to change our behaviours in terms of how we use electricity, energy efficiency, EVs, and so on. So we launched a campaign called the Green Light Campaign on the back of that, because what came out of that survey was people were saying that actually they recognise that there's really big stuff going on, like building 50 gigawatts of offshore wind, but it didn't resonate and they didn't know how to connect with the journey to net zero. And the campaign that we launched was very much around what every individual can do at home to make a contribution, and the fact that if we all make a small contribution, it all adds up to a big impact. And as part of that, we spend time with schools talking about the role that they can play in terms of education, but also the opportunities that actually are going to be presented to kids in school today to be on that journey to net zero. So the study that we did says that we need 400,000 people in the UK to help deliver energy zero by 2050. That's a huge number of people, and we can't afford not to be attracting women and people from all parts of society. And therefore, we have a strong sort of desire to make that connection as early as possible. So I'd love to talk to you about how we can do better, because it obviously isn't resonating as much as I'd like. On the waste issue, again, National Grid actually last month launched in the US a vision for clean energy for heating. And as part of that, we did a study that looked at the role that renewable natural gas could play being captured from waste. And what that said was that actually decarbonisation of heat is the tricky part of actually decarbonisation of energy, because gas is generally flexible and people like it for heating and cooking. But renewable natural gas is an untapped source, and actually if we could tap it, whether it's through waste or through other things like farming and so on and so forth, then actually you can reduce the cost of decarbonisation. So for our Massachusetts customers, by $800 to $1,000 a year relative to electrifying everything. So again, like Claire, I think my plea is keep plugging away at it, because I think it's got an important role to play as part of the net zero journey.
Thanks, John. Just we're very short on time, so maybe just take a final comment from
Yeah,
Tony and then Bernice. And then we'll
Mike,
wrap up.
it's a very good question. I don't know the answer, and I think probably what I don't know enough about is what's the scale of the opportunity, and therefore why is it not in the debate? But we will pick up on that challenge. That's my plea. As for the school question, look, I think it's a very good question because the truth is there is generational tension, right? And we all know it from our conversations with our children around the dinner table, right? There is a generational tension about climate change. And it's all infused with a sort of, with a question of morality and whether or not we sufficiently care, as opposed to questions of practicality. And I've seen it myself with my own son through school and now into university where he's doing a geography degree, where all of a sudden the nature of the debate has gone from moral outrage to co-creation of solutions. And so I think it's a brilliant thought. I don't want to lose the moral outrage of a younger generation because we need it to propel this agenda. At the same time, the sooner we start to surface the realities of how we innovate and how they can do the right kinds of qualifications to be creators of the solutions, then the better.
Great.
Yeah, I love that question about waste, why not? But also it reminds me a little bit of the energy efficiency discussion about 10 years ago, which is that lots of things that make sense don't happen because of institutional barriers. And we underestimate the importance of policy in helping us drive through this, because imagine collecting waste from lots of different bits. How do you add it up? We talk about a scaling challenge. So I think there's an excellent question that we should really figure out what are the responses, because lots of things like energy efficiency that we could have actually failed years ago if we didn't keep going, because we didn't appreciate the importance of overcoming institutional barriers and some of the policy barriers that we really need in order to get to the scale that would make it really make sense, truly.
Great. Okay. I think we are out of time. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So just give a round of applause for our panel. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Adam, huge thanks to you, to Bernice, Claire, John, and of course Tony for that opening session. Look, just as we're changing over our panelists and getting new microphones set up, we're about to get going with our next panel session of the morning, Green Growth, Still an Opportunity. We've already heard from Tony the net zero transition, an economic opportunity as well as an environmental necessity. We hear from businesses all the time about the huge potential for green growth through new jobs, through new markets, and through new innovations. So how can the UK establish and cement itself as a world leader? What should we be backing and what should we be promoting? To debate all of this in a moment, we're going to welcome onto the stage